Hello and welcome everyone. This is Parag back for the second part of the mega series on the destruction of Itihasa by the Marxists. In the last part with Sandeep, we started actually right from the definition of history, what qualifies as history writing, and the shape it took over the last several decades in the form of history that we believed for a long while, till we saw otherwise, thanks to the work done by historians like Sandeep Balakrishna and others. And we reached a stage where we had seen the emergence of the likes of Habib and the Marxist historians, while stalwart, genuine historians continued to exist. In this part, which is the second part of this mega series, we shall now talk to Sandeep Balakrishna on the trajectory history writing, or Itihasa as it's more correctly described, took from here on, and bring it to a stage where the Marxists have started to take control of the entire narrative peddling, which was packaged as history to all of us through school curricula. It is important to do this exercise, like I said in the last part, because, like Sandeep described, the ultimate aim of history is to bring out the truth, and the aim is to have this serve as a ready reckoner for truth. And who better to do it than with Sandeep Balakrishna? So, with that, let's get started with the second part. Hi, Sandeep. It's good to be back with you again for the second part of the mega series on the destruction of history by Marxists. So, you brought us to a stage where, like I said, the Marxists had begun to emerge, Habib had begun to emerge, and genuine stalwart historians existed. So, could you take us through the trajectory of how history shaped from here on?
Yeah, Parag, I think in the last episode, like you rightly pointed out, we closed that previous episode at, by looking at some of the great work done by the luminaries or the stalwarts of the new Indian Renaissance and how a parallel track was emerging in the discipline of history at places like the Aligarh University and Allahabad. Aligarh primarily led by a gentleman named Muhammad Habib. So, from that point till what we can hopefully manage to cover in this episode uh, is from that point onward how events unfolded within the discipline of history till India attained independence, and then from then on, what changes were introduced, in the uh, both at the level of teaching and writing history, including writing history at all levels, from the from school textbooks all the way up to postgrad and even PhD levels. So we'll try and cover that story today. Now, if you look at, since this is a mega series documenting the Marxist destruction of Indian history, this whole story, rather the whole saga, can be divided into four or five broad but correct, neatly identifiable phases. In the first phase was this pioneering work done by archaeologists, historians of the that emerged during the colonial rule. That includes both British and Indian stalwarts. We have mentioned names like Jagannath Sarkar, R.C. Majumdar, Dr. S.C. Kantashastri, all these real giants. That is stage number one, where history was defined, like I never tire of mentioning, where history was defined as an objective quest for truth. All right. Now, this was the first stage. The second stage, thereby the first stage actually was the pioneering stage. The foundations, for history writing, for history research, for interpretation of history, for uncovering new facts, data, truths about our past, the foundations were laid during this first stage or first phase. Now, in the second phase, the students of these pioneering historians or scholars, history scholars, they continued the same tradition of their teachers. Now, it is very, very hard for someone today meaning in the last, say, 50 years at least, it is very hard today for someone to imagine how this tradition existed about a century ago, which is the second stage. That is when you had stalwarts like students of, say, Jadunath Sarkar. That could be K.R. Kanungo, Srivastava. I mean, he's left behind a beautiful educational progeny. Sarkar maintained three houses. He worked in three different places. One in Calcutta, one in Darjeeling, and another one in Patna. For the longest time, he taught at Patna University. He had let out a part of his home. These were, majestic, huge buildings. He had let out a part of his homes to his students. He would feed them, he would teach them. It was a proper Gurukul in that sense.
Groom and nurture them.
Groom and nurture them. And he would regularly monitor their progress. There's no hand holding and, giving grace marks, things like that didn't exist. You set your height, you set your standard as Mount Everest. Only then you approach him.
Only then can a progeny of that quality emerge.
Can emerge. So his progeny, people like that. And if you come to, say, Karnataka, Professor M. Hiriyanna, he was not a historian per se. His greatest contributions are in the field of Indian philosophy and aesthetics. But he again was cut from the same cloth as Sarkar, of maintaining and adhering to the highest standards of scholarship. And his students have themselves become legends.
Self-imposed standards.
Yes.
Of the highest order.
Yes. So Sarkar churned out such students. Likewise, Majumdar as well. I mean, the kind of people that he mentored, they became regarded as giants in their own time. So this tradition, what is known as Vidya Parampara, so it is rooted in our Vidya Parampara. The standards that these people set, their approach to history writing, their approach to scholarship, it forms part of the sacred Vidya Parampara of India, which basically says that if a guru does not produce or does not produce equally illustrious scholars,
then he's not
through his students, then not only is he not regarded as a proper guru, our tradition believed that such a guru would go to hell. These people had that inbuilt cultural, civilizational temperament within them. That is why, their students also became equally illustrious. And the students of his time, matlab the second or third generation after people like Sarkar, by that time the dilution had begun. So, but right now we are at the second phase or the second stage. And their scholarship, a quest for truth, these things were taken for granted. Nobody questioned the innate value system that gives you this kind of outlook and shapes your research and your academic activity.
The motive was never under suspicion
No,
because
no,
the quest
no.
was for truth.
Quest was pure. And the second stage is when this which was beautifully watered by that pioneering tradition. And there also it was fine. But this real story, like I said, begins after the parallel emergence of people like Muhammad Habib. He was also a contemporary of K.R. Konungo, down here, Neelakanta Shastri, Krishnaswamy Iyengar, all these, really giants. Now, as this kept happening, it spilled over to the third stage. That third stage occurs after India attained independence.
So, just for the benefit of audience and me included, the stages have a time perspective in terms of evolution.
Yes, they do. The first stage occurs during the initial colonization of British, who began to take an interest in India's past. I mean, we covered this aspect in the previous episode. And that led to the second stage where, academics, it was very, very hard, Parag, to get into academics, get into higher education. It was really higher education in every sense of the word. Now, what is known as universal literacy, the amount of damage it has caused because of its unthinking adoption, the amount of damage it has caused, we are paying for the cost.
It's
We
always
are paying the
somebody, yeah,
cost.
it's always
In
somebody
fact,
else.
yeah. So back then, I'll give you a small example. Back then, in Karnataka at least, I think it is true for all of India. A person was considered as fit for gainful employment. A person was considered well educated, and a person was considered worthy of getting married if he passed the fifth form. The fifth form meaning uh, roughly today's equivalent of say ninth standard or 10th standard. So that was known as the 5 rupees examination in Karnataka. 5 rupai parikshe.
Okay.
So
You
you
have
would
to earn your spurs on
uh,
these parameters.
and by that time you would have pretty much had a thorough grounding in mathematics, basic arithmetic, a bit of algebra, geometry, uh, language especially, language, vocabulary, and some kind of what is known as skills. That's all it is. Very simple but very thorough, because it prepared for a generalized kind of life. These were basic life skills which the person, the student who has passed his exam would never forget throughout his life, and therefore he would be fit for employment across multiple domains.
So foundational pillars.
Foundational pillars were so strong. Now you can, I mean, today we live in a age of high specialization, but the uh, downside of extra or extreme specialization is that you confuse the forest for the trees.
And specialization also comes in after foundations are laid. So it can't
No,
come at the
no,
cost of foundation.
no. In those days, Newton, for example, was a great expositor of English and Greek and Latin literature.
Which is not what he is otherwise known
So
for.
these are, that old classical system of education. It instilled what is loosely known as a sense of a person who underwent that educational system would emerge as a polymath.
So as opposed to being unidimensional.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So, fifth form. So then, after that, when you were considered brilliant in that fifth form, then the teachers would identify you and they will groom you. That, listen, you have a future in academics. You have a future as a scholar. For, average, mediocre students, they would say, okay, fine, you've done your fifth form, start applying for a job, or, if you want to go and do your PU, take your call, whatever. But they knew those other mediocre students are essentially set for life. Now, even if you have 2 or 3 PhDs, I have seen in my own experience, people with PhD can't write a single grammatically correct sentence in English or any other language. So higher education, like I said, was really higher education. And in all of India, in 1947, there were only 12 or 16 universities, which should have been, I think, which still I think is the ideal way to be. You have proliferation of universities. I think hundreds, if not thousands, of universities, both private and public, government put together. But anyway, I'm digressing. Now, after India attained independence, there were multiple competing viewpoints, perspectives as to writing or studying and teaching Indian history. The first is what can loosely be called the nationalist school. This was populated by people like Rajwade from Maharashtra. Then they were, more properly called the Maratha school of historians, but let's not go into those details. Broadly speaking, there's this nationalist school of Indian historians who had this blind approach of upholding and glorifying everything in our past.
Okay, so you're saying
even the negatives.
Even the negatives.
Okay, but you cannot, it stemmed from a sense of cultural and national pride. You see why this approach comes? It's because they were all participants and witnesses of the Indian freedom struggle. They had personally endured colonial oppression. So it is natural to understand, where
The
their
struggles, the
motivation,
sacrifices.
where the motivation to glorify everything in India's past comes from. But they were not ideological in the sense of their opposing camp, which was the camp of the Marxists. So after India, in the first few years after India attained independence, these were two broadly clashing schools of historiography or history writing in India. Now, the Marxist group that had a very, very clear ideological agenda. They interpreted, they viewed Indian history not as history. They viewed Indian history as uh, as a tool or as a vehicle to carry out, to bring in the glorious Marxist or communist revolution in India. History was one of the tools, one of the aids, one of the methods to bring in this revolution. Other methods are the street agitation, cinema, drama, painting, dance, street plays, this kind of thing. So history was also one of these
Vehicles
to implement a glorious communist revolution. So history no longer, when you have an academic discipline like history, an objective scientific field, however you want to define it. But like I said, the best way to define it is as a quest for truth. Like I said, any discipline, if you devote yourself honestly, patiently, and if you persevere in it for long enough, it will lead you to philosophy. Marxists had nothing to do with philosophy. They didn't, that notion doesn't even exist in their ideology. Marxists have everything to do with politics and the capture of political power. As simple as that.
through any vehicles at their disposal.
Anything, all means are sab jaiz hai. That,
So before you go further, I'm tempted to ask, so this uh, ideological template to capture power through these multiple vehicles or means, this happened in other theaters of the world too, or India was chosen as a particular theater to
this
penetrate
is
education or academia?
this is a very beautiful question, Parag. Wherever communists have captured power, political power in the world, the first is obviously former USSR or Russia. It is today extremely hard to find an authentic history of what Russia looked like before Lenin's revolution destroyed it.
Oh, you can't find
It is very hard. There are some reliable accounts, but one of the as long as the communists are not in power and they are agitating for power, doing all kinds of protests and violence, one of the things they also do in their propaganda is to distort history. History distortion is an invariable part of communist propaganda, whether they are in power or out of power or on their paths to power.
whichever stage they are in.
Whichever stage they are in. But once they capture power, the first thing that communists do is to literally burn and destroy all historical literature. All right?
Yep.
What did Mao do? His so-called great cultural revolution is, it is still celebrated by fossils like Amartya Sen. He thinks it's a great leap forward and some kind of a great progressive march that liberated China from the clutches of regressiveness and feudalism. These are all their standard catchphrases. But Mao was one of the biggest mass murderers in human history, if not the biggest. He exterminated what? 5 million or 6 million or what? No, I think 30 million of his own countrymen. What revolution was?
At the cost.
What land of
A genocide.
What land of milk and communist paradise will you create
By
by
exterminating 30 million.
creating genocide of your own people? They are not your enemies.
And the number you mentioned is staggering.
Yeah, it's staggering.
If I am not wrong, please correct me.
Uh-huh.
I think recently, I think it was his, the remembrance of Mao was done by the Communist Party in India.
Remembrance of Lenin.
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 Yeah,
Lenin.
the ode was paid
Lenin's-
by the Communist Party
yeah,
or
yeah,
whatever is left
Sitaram
of it.
Yechuri and yeah. Lenin's birthday or something. So it was prominently out there. So Mao, he burnt all the libraries. He launched a nationwide hunt, literally hunt, of all Buddhist monks, slaughtered them indiscriminately. Millions of them. Why? Because they were the living links to China's pre-communist past.
Oh, so it had to be severed.
You can burn books. Books, like Bruce Lee says, words don't hit back. Books can't rescue themselves. So you can burn buildings, raise them down, annihilate them, vandalize them, because they can't hit back. But fine, you can burn books. But what about the people who have the knowledge that those books contain
And can pass it on.
and can pass it on? How do you deal with them? Kill, murder, slaughter, rape.
Everything was
This is
possible.
communist progress. The same thing happened in Russia. The same thing happened in China. The same thing pretty much happened in Cuba. For example, that guy, a lot of these fashionable, urban, deracinated urban Hindu youth, they have a great love, a great admiration for that monster called Che Guevara.
The posters adorn hostel walls.
Stickers and
Yeah, yeah.
posters are there on the back of their
Various
cars
merchandise.
and other
I think
places.
half of them don't even know who he is when they put it on the
They
t-shirts.
don't.
Yeah.
He was responsible for the murder of at least 2 million people. Fidel Castro.
It almost sounds like a criteria for being a commie.
Yeah.
How many people you examine?
Yeah. All that bandana and his whole rugged look with that revolutionary beard, that appeals, and his great sex appeal with women.
Yes.
So this forms part of that whole myth making and the heroism, alleged heroism of this monster. But yeah, coming back to the topic, communists have burnt any information, not just relating to history, but anything related to their pre-communist past, wherever they have captured power. So Russia, Cuba, China, so on. But here they couldn't do that because they ultimately failed to make serious inroads in Indian politics. But that apart, this distortion has always been par for the course. Once you capture power, there is no need to distort your past. There is a need to say only one thing, that this, Lenin, Stalin, all these governments, they repeated thing that he is a Soviet patriot.
Okay.
Comrade, whatever, Paragakov is a true Soviet patriot. Why? Because he's faithful to the Communist Party of Russia.
So that's how the comrade.
That's how they do it. So when only your narrative is presented as not only the real truth, but the everlasting truth, the eternal truth. Nothing like a pre-communist past existed, and that past is no longer relevant because we liberated you from it.
So therefore, it finds no place or mention.
Exactly. So this is exactly one of the central messages of George Orwell's both books, brilliant books, Animal Farm and
Animal Farm.
1984
Seminal books,
and
seminal.
1984.
Yeah.
So 1984, there is a beautiful line in which I think the protagonist gets tortured by one of the government officials, and that man tells the protagonist that, look, what we say is history. We don't, there is nothing like a past and there is nothing like a future. And what is present depends on what in the present is decided as truth. I'm paraphrasing it. So you distort the present itself, which is exactly what your media is doing.
Exactly.
You create multiple narratives in such a way, lie on lie both in terms of you know, volume and spread, that it becomes impossible for you to get at truth.
I'm tempted to.
As simple as that, let's take Burhan Wani to illustrate how this
Yes.
works. All right, that man was a terrorist. That boy was a terrorist, and he was no terrorist. He had been systematically brainwashed by the Islamic clergy, and he went on killing people. Right? Two counts. Terrorism is a war against the elected government, sovereign nation. Two, terrorism with this kind of a background plus indulging in murder is also a criminal offense punishable by death penalty. All right. Now he is killed by law enforcement agencies. This is the facts of the case. This is the truth. But how is it spun?
Headmaster's son remains legendary.
Poor headmaster's son, poor headmaster's misguided son. All right, this people say this, news media people say this with a straight face. And then 3 or 4 years later, there are conflicting, when they say conflicting versions of the same event, no sir,
The facts are like you said.
they are very clear.
That is all there is to it.
So this is a flesh and blood real life case in, you know, Burhan Wani.
The Qawmi playbook playing out even now.
Ishrat Jahan, these are all real life flesh and blood case. Now imagine doing this distortion in the realm of theory. Imagine the scope. Imagine the possibilities for lying and defrauding. It is unlimited. So you take history. Now, 100 years back, we no longer have access to the society that existed even in the 1970s. All right. So you have to reconstruct. What are the sources for reconstructing that? So lived tales of people, newspaper reports. Now,
But if they are doctrinated themselves.
Exactly my point. Imagine reading, you know, about an incident or event or a political happening related to the 1970s, put out by National Herald.
Exactly. And that is the
Related
source.
to emergency,
Absolutely. Scary example, but very much possible.
right?
Or could have been possible.
You have, forget National Herald. Take the case of Khushwant Singh. He actually justified emergency. There are any number of Khushwant Singh in, you know, in recent memory. Now you come back again. This relates to your question, which was you know, using Marxist propaganda to you know, using history to disseminate Marxist propaganda. What is known as Marxist history is Marxism injected into a discipline called history.
I think this distinction is absolutely paramount then.
Parag, you cannot be a Marxist and a historian at the same time. It's an oxymoron. You are either a Marxist or a historian. So now this leads us, this you know, this nationalist school of historians and Marxist school. Then there were Jadunath Sarkar, for example, was accused of being a stooge of the colonial British. You can disagree with some of his interpretations, but you cannot accuse him of lying.
Accused by Marxists conveniently, or
No, you can.
a particular section?
No. There is enough evidence in his own writings to show that he had
Leading.
he
soft
had a slightly soft corner for you know, the British.
Okay.
And you have to put it in perspective. What you call a soft corner, you have, when you transport yourself back to his time. You can say that he, like many other people of his time, he was a product of his own time. He saw that, you know, after the same Jadunath Sarkar was accused by some people as being favorable to the colonial British rule, the same man makes a very, very important observation. He says, and including Majumdar says this, but I mean, they share pretty much the same opinion. He says that India did not lose her freedom in 1857 or 1858 or with the advent of British. What happened with the advent of British was that India merely changed her masters. She had already been enslaved 500 years ago. The same Sarkar writes this. You can't accuse him of being, favorable to that. As a product of his time, but all said and done, the British introduced a certain systematic way of writing history and understanding and approaching history. Above all, because for the first time, they kind of politically held all of India under one umbrella. This extent of territory of Indian territory, including Afghanistan, they had control over Afghanistan, all the way till Sri Lanka, Burma. That extent of landmass out here in Asia, no emperor in India's history has ever controlled. No single emperor. This is a historical truth as well. And by doing that, one of the positive outcomes of this political control, which led them to explore India's past, was that you got access and you got a certain method and tools for research and writing the whole of India's history. Until then, it could be Kalhana's Rajatarangini, other scattered accounts of Indian history written by Hindu historians during the Muslim and pre-Muslim period. You will not find a single systematic history of entire Bharatavarsha written in ancient times. This is what historians, scholars of the colonial era pointed out. You can't charge them of being biased towards colonialism. This is truth.
So in a sense, the small power aspect benefited.
Yeah.
I mean, benefited us.
It's a huge benefit.
Yeah.
Now, without archaeological excavations, without technologies for scientific dating of, say, coins and other artifacts, half of the history of Hindu temples, the story of the destruction of Hindu temples, which has been systematically documented later by, most notably by Sitaram Goel, it wouldn't have been possible without the aids and the tools and scientific advancements that were introduced during the colonial
times.
So you cannot argue with this.
And give credit where it's due.
Yeah, give credit where it is due. So that was one school. So this nationalist school also had a big beef with Jagannath Sarkar for this reason. We won't get into those details, but these were, like I said, these were some of the main currents that were circulating in prevalent within the academic establishment just after India got independence. And now, as a kind of preface to the third phase, you have this famous example, real life incident of the tragic fate of R.C. Majumdar, which I have recounted in great length on Dharma Dispatch in 3 or 4 parts. After independence, one of the things that happened was a government project to write the comprehensive history of the Indian freedom struggle. And in a
Government as in the post-independence.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, there is an extraordinary speech of P.V. Kane, which he made and delivered in 1946 at one conference. He gives us a comprehensive list of almost all the academicians and historians, top-notch historians working throughout India, and all the bodies, dedicated academic, private, public, non-academic bodies dedicated to studying the history of India. Andhra Historical Research Society, some societies in what was then known as the Mysore Princely States. A lot of them were there. Gujarat, Maharashtra, the Maharashtra Aitihasik Samshodhan Mandal. So these things, hundreds of them. He gives a huge list, and Kane basically makes an appeal. He says, look, so many of these are bodies are there, and most of their work are in the same areas, meaning overlapping. While new findings, valuable as they are, they have to be collated in one in a systematic format. And then he makes points, gives outlines as to how to write the comprehensive history of India from the Vedic age till 1947. Now, while
So this was P.V. Kane's recommendation to the government of India,
no, it was in a you can
in
no,
a sense.
No, there's no government of India back then.
Okay.
This was in 1946.
1946.
Yeah, India was not yet free.
So this was okay.
But of course, we all knew that freedom was on the. He knew that freedom was on the
Yeah.
horizon. So this was like an advance intimation as to the challenges that.
In fact, he made the task easier.
Challenges that would be faced, after India got independence. But anyway, when this project to write the comprehensive history of the Indian freedom struggle was mooted by the government of India, a lot of eminent scholars were there, and I think it was headed by R.C. Majumdar. So the project met, a lot of deliberations were happening, which went on for several months. Different seminars were held on the same topic to evolve a proper working model. And he prepared the proposal and submitted it to the government of India. Government looked at it, and then there was no response from that side. Majumdar waited, and he thought, he did not suspect that anything was wrong, anything had gone wrong, or about this. He patiently waited, but when nothing happened, he wrote to the education minister, he wrote to the prime minister, he wrote to various people in influential positions. Nothing happened. Then finally, to cut a long story short, he writes this himself. He says that this project, then a committee was convened, and then it was decided to put this project in cold storage.
I'm tempted to ask who was the education minister at that point?
Maulana Azad.
Maulana Azad. Yeah.
It was decided to put the project in cold storage, and later Majumdar gives the reason. One of the points that his proposal contained was to write the full and the truth and nothing but the truth and the full truth about India's freedom struggle, which roughly begins with the Battle of Plassey. He did not say this in so many words, but for the benefit of the audience, I'm contextualizing it. It begins with the Battle of Plassey and ends with 1947. Now, look at the time span, 250 years, and look at the sheer size, sheer geographical extent of India in which this great freedom struggle took place. And look at the number of generations of people, good, bad, ugly, that took part in the freedom struggle. He said, I will write the full truth and nothing but the truth about all these people and incidents and events that went into making the freedom struggle, and in which the British were finally thrown out. Now, when you say the full truth and nothing but the truth, a lot of the actors of the freedom struggle about whom Majumdar would write were still alive.
They went up in arms?
Nawab Nehru was alive, Maulana Azad was alive, Rajgopalachari was alive. And they, these were all prolific writers as well. Their speeches were recorded. The decisions they took at various points in time were recorded, all in black and white. Photographs were there. Correspondence was there. And not all of them were flattering. But, you had got freedom just 1 or 2 years before this project was mooted. And you had Nawab Nehru, who was at the peak of his glory, enjoying all the adulation as a great patriot and cultured man who had done so much for India, this kind of thing. and also various Congress ministers and other, so-called great people. Great people also have great flaws. Great people are also prone to making mistakes. It is all too human. So the feeling in the officialdom was that these truths had to be selectively written, so that
it doesn't dent any of the glory or image
dent the halo of glory that they had suddenly acquired.
required.
So the project was put in cold storage.
So when you said truth and nothing but the truth,
Yeah.
I mean it was coming that very few people have the appetite for truth,
Truth,
however
correct.
great they may
Yeah.
be.
Now that project was frozen, and they said, "Chalo, fir se dekhte." Later, it was disbanded. But Majumdar was not a man to be cowed down so easily, and he writes in one place, in the end of the introduction to Volume 1, he writes very movingly that as a historian, I am bothered only with objective truths, because history does not, as a discipline, history is not a friend or a foe of anybody.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. And when I set out to write this history, I was motivated only by the truth. And this topic of, the Indian freedom struggle is very personal to me, and I will not pretend that I am a detached observer, because I was very much a witness and a participant in this great freedom movement.
It was not like he was observing from a remote observatory. He was a part.
He had lived those. Majumdar was born in 1905 or 1901 or something.
So witnessed it for 40 plus years.
Witness this, yeah. All the cast of characters were, moving around in flesh and blood.
Yeah.
He had seen them, he had met, interacted with several of them in very high places. So his project was settled, but that did not, deter him. So what Majumdar did, he resolved that, you forget this entire government machinery aside. I will take it upon myself to write the whole thing. And in about 6 years, he brought out the majestic history of the Indian freedom struggle in 3 volumes. It is still unsurpassed. New information about the freedom struggle might have emerged since the publication of that work, but in terms of its fidelity to truth, in its candor, in its analysis, in its examination of the primary sources, it is unsurpassed
The gold standard.
till date.
Actually,
And you know what happened? There is a ugly footnote to this. Once Majumdar, began writing it, this old project, the original project, was suddenly revived by the government. And this time, it was headed by a bureaucrat named as Tarachand, who was basically a chamcha of Nehru.
okay.
He was not a scholar of history by any standard. He was a bureaucrat.
So he was in charge of this
He
project.
had served as India's ambassador in Tehran. He was roped in by officialdom to head this project. And that project dragged on for 12 long years.
By design. Or
I mean,
efficiency.
Any government project is like this.
Like that.
I mean, it's a miracle that it even got completed. Unfortunately, that is the so-called official version of the history of the Indian freedom struggle till date. Nobody takes it seriously. A lot of paper is wasted reprinting those volumes, but that apart, that book was released by none other than Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad, who was India's education minister at the time. The same Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad, who signed as President of India, he signed the Declaration of Emergency.
Oh, he was the same person.
Yeah.
We were in good hands.
All roads lead to
Nawab Nehru. We were in good hands. We were in good hands.
So Tara Chand was Nawab Nehru's stooge. So this kind of thing happened. And why I'm saying all this is that this was a turning point. Majumdar's ignominious exit, he was pretty much banned from official academic circles.
The cost of being the pallbearer of truth.
This set a template. Now, something else was also happening. This, when these sorts of things were happening, that real history establishment was being tampered with directly from the highest levers of power in the government. There was another minister, law minister named K.M. Munshi. He was worried that, look, what is happening to this hard-won freedom? If this is the direction in which this country is headed to. So he silently approached the same R.C. Majumdar and said, this is a perfect time to compile an authentic and a complete history of India from the Vedic age. And you are the only person to do this.
So this was his individual moral compass and interest.
So, interest. So Munshi had already founded the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan by that time.
Okay.
So he said that, my organization will support this. And he put R.C. Majumdar in charge of this project. He became the general editor. And after working for nearly 20 years, 15 years, the history and the culture of the Indian people, majestic volumes again, in 11 volumes came out. If it had been left to the official government machine, apparatus, anyway, I'll come to that in the next section. So that is still the gold standard, once again.
So for the benefit of the audience, what are these volumes called and where can they be found?
History and the Culture of Indian People, published by Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan. Okay. It is widely available. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Vidya Bhavan's site as well. You can find it in any, the bookstore in the campus of Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan across India.
Thanks.
So it's widely available. For the longest time, these volumes were out of print because there was no patronage for them. And, that is a indicator, one more indicator of the, title of this mega series, the Marxist Destruction of History. You destroy it on such an epic scale for so long that such authentic volumes of such authentic history people have not even heard their names.
And
you hadn't heard.
I hadn't heard.
Yeah.
More than that, I think I think it would be interesting to do a poll on how many people have heard of Jadunath Sarkar itself to start with.
Nowadays, the awareness is slightly there, especially over the last, especially with the emergence of blogging and later social media, that this awareness of these names have kind of increased to an impressive extent.
But I would still put my money on the fact that between the age group,
you would put your money on the ignorance.
On the ignorance.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
I wouldn't blame
agree.
them. But
I agree.
Going back to the comedy template, because they've been eradicated.
Yes, absolutely.
Even if somebody looks,
they
won't find much.
Story also in the coming episodes. Now, Munshi teamed up with Majumdar, and Majumdar recruited a whole army of the topmost scholars in related to various specializations in Indian history. Now the section on the cultural and devotional aspects of Karnataka history were written by Dr. S. Shrikanta Shastri. A historical scholar like Dr. Shastri will emerge once in, say, 300 years. This was his caliber.
And again, I don't think anybody has heard of him.
He was the first professor of Indian history who swam against the tide, against the huge tide known as the Aryan invasion theory. At the time when it was received wisdom, at the time when it was unchallengeable, a lot of people, including Majumdar, had uncritically accepted that the Aryans, mythical Aryans from Central Asia, had invaded India. This was a hold of that myth. only in the limited span of my reading, scope of my reading, only Shrikanta Shastri had the guts not only to suspect that, this is not true, but also to declare it in his classes to his students, MA students, very clearly that this so-called Aryan invasion theory is a bogus construct. It has been created out of thin air, but you write it, you uphold it, just so that you can pass your exams and get your degree. But do not accept it. Some of the most illustrious students of Dr. S. Shrikanta Shastri was a great archaeologist named S.R. Rao, who was also instrumental in the Babri Masjid excavations, so-called Babri Masjid excavations.
Okay, K.K. Mohammed
Which
gets
brings
mentioned.
us back to that tradition, pioneering tradition of creating generations of stalwarts.
A progeny of brilliant students, right?
Yeah.
Who are worthy of the mantle.
Yeah. Now, once this, Bharati, these parallel developments were happening, something else was also happening. The Marxists had slowly begun to spread their tentacles because of several reasons, but the most prominent reason was the fact that they had captured a man named Nawab Nehru. He became their prized puppet. So the communists got their prized puppet in the form of a man named Nawab Nehru, whose idea, not whose idea, Nawab Nehru learnt Indian history by sitting at the feet of, surprise, Muhammad Habib. Now, if he learns, especially the history of the medieval period or the Muslim period, from a complete bigot like Muhammad Habib, is it any surprising that he will, and combined with his Nawabi Allahabadi upbringing,
Marination, like we spoke about.
Upbringing, is it any surprise that Nawab Nehru turned out the way he did? To that was added his formal academic training under hardcore Marxists like Harold Lasky. He was this economics professor in London, in England.
Habib's professor?
No, Nehru's professor.
professor.
Yeah. So you learn economics from Marxists. You learn the history of the medieval Muslim period under Muhammad Habib. What does that make you? You write a monumental dud called Discovery of India.
Monumental dud. I think that's going to rile up some people as they hear this. Yeah. So I need to ask you this at this point in time. How did Habib come to, you use the word capture in a different context a little earlier about somebody else. So how did all these people find Nehru as a convenient capture, so to speak? So they sense it, and
it's like this, Parag, fantastic. I can give you an analogy in the animal kingdom.
This is going to rile up more people now.
An animal, a wild animal which hunts for its prey, a lion, tiger, hyena, cheetah,
a predator,
which hunts for a prey. Animals live by instincts, and predators, one of the things that they have a finely honed instinct for sensing fear in the prey. The moment, their antenna is fully tuned, 100% tuned to the prey, the fear of the prey, is when the kill happens.
So,
all right.
Okay.
So capture and then kill. So this is exactly how the Marxists and people like Muhammad Habib, Nehru was a prey for them.
Because they sense fear?
They sense not just fear.
Vulnerability.
They sense vulnerability. You see, Nehru, when he was, he had a very troubled childhood. He had a very domineering father. Motilal Nehru was an extremely authoritarian personality. He ran his whole household like a dictator, like a tyrant. Exhibited the same thing in his public life as well. Extremely dominating character. So obviously he was dominating. Nehru couldn't even when he was a grown-up adult, Nehru could not look at him in his eyes. And then he had a very sheltered childhood. English governesses, French female teachers, and then his what is that? Boarding school in I think in Eton or Harrow in England, and then again in Cambridge. And he was bullied. British public schools, British private schools, for boys back then, I don't know now, back then, there are any number of horror stories about the kind of bullying that went on. So they say that it is meant to toughen you up, but what do you mean, kids as young as 10 years old, beating up all kinds of abuses of their own juniors, fellow students. That's no way to grow
usually
up.
the bogey around
That's
bullying.
that's no way to grow up. I mean that might harden you or anything, but it will also make you cruel.
Yeah, also causes damage.
It will eliminate some basic compassion which humans have, which is inbuilt into all of us. But anyway, so this was Nehru's upbringing. So he always needed protection of stronger men around him. It could be Motilal Nehru. Later it could be Gandhi. Gandhi had a very dominant influence over Nawab Nehru. Gandhi didn't need to raise his voice, but his whole authoritarian personality, a saintly tyrant, Nehru needed that kind of protection.
I think the upbringing itself led to that, right?
I mean, Nawab Nehru was a very weak man. He's a proper classic psychological case study. Psychiatrists will have a field day analyzing his behavior patterns.
Third strike.
Yeah.
Third strike again.
So that, and look at what happened once Nehru no longer had any stronger personalities to safeguard him, to guide him, to mentor him. Look at all the decisions that he independently took. The first thing led to a semi-permanent problem called Kashmir. The second thing led to India's humiliation in the hands of China. The third thing led to India becoming a satellite state, almost a satellite state of the Soviet Union. All these disasters occurred each time Nawab Nehru used his alleged independent judgment, bereft of the safety, security, and the solace provided by stronger men. Now, plus he was also prone to flattery. What happens to such a personality when he is put into positions of extreme power? There's nobody more powerful than Prime Minister. What happens to such people is exactly the history of India since 1947. And such people are naturally bullies and they are prone to flattery. And people like Muhammad Habib and the communists, they sensed this weakness in Nehru.
So flattery is also typically a need because you want constant self-validation because of certain
lacuna within yourself.
Yeah, lacuna within yourself.
So they flattered him and he fell for it. They flattered him, one, in the case of communists, because that is the focus of the series. Marxist communists, they adopted a two-pronged or three-pronged approach. One was to flatter him. The second was the fact that they recognized their power over him because he had an addiction. I mean, Sitaram Goel calls it beautifully. He characterizes Nawab Nehru as an incurable Soviet addict. All right. Now, Nehru had this lifelong addiction for Soviet Russia. And India was the only country. When Stalin died, the whole world, it heaved a sigh of relief that this kind of a monster is finally gone.
And somebody,
Nehru stands up in the Indian Parliament, gives a long speech extolling the greatness of Stalin and greatness of Marshal Stalin. And honorable members, I request you, honorable members, that the Parliament be adjourned for 2 days in the memory of Marshal Stalin.
and he did not live to see what happened thereafter. That the statue of Stalin itself was uprooted,
toppled. So this was his fascination for Soviet Russia and for Marshal Stalin. And communists knew this. Indian communists were not Indians. They are not Indians from day one. If you are a communist, you are anti-India. Simple. From day one, when they were acquiring power, since the days of M.N. Roy onwards, from that time onwards till the fall of Soviet Union, they were taking orders from Russia directly, and one branch they were taking orders from China, Maoist China. They didn't care a damn about what Nehru said or did. So what they used to do is they played him beautifully, like a accomplished violinist. They played him brilliantly. When he implemented some policies or gave statements that communists considered as offensive, they would write a series of articles basically blasting Nawab Nehru, because they knew, they had understood his psychology. He would cave in, and he would
because their word or opinion mattered.
And they had this power because they had direct access to Moscow. And oftentimes, the line that these people, the very articles that our communists had to write against Nehru was dictated from Moscow.
So, in itself,
and with this kind of power, it is not at all difficult, was not at all difficult for the Marxists and all their fellow travelers to slowly take over institutions.
And from here on began the conquest of institutions.
Yes. All in bureaucracy. Even today, the hold of the left, very few people, very few bureaucrats of last 2 generations openly call themselves Marxists or communists. They don't need to, because their very education from the childhood onwards have already been rigged by the previous generations of Marxists. So they don't need to openly call themselves a comrade and dear comrade and revolution and this progressive garbage.
But the irony, I need to call this out, that here was a democratic country, a hard-won independence, and a democratically elected prime minister was in the awe of communists, completely opposing ideology.
Yeah.
The irony itself is so stark. It never. I'm surprised that it coexisted at all in the first place.
This is another wonderful question, Parag. Nehru never believed in democracy. You see, there is a truth to a very famous saying: never believe what a politician says. Believe in what he does. Actions speak louder than words. Yeah. So while Nehru said, I'm a great Democrat, and he gave complete freedom to the press to criticize him and caricature him and cartoonify him and things like that, in practice, what was his behavior? Nothing less than a despot and a tyrant. Classic case is the hounding out of people like R.C. Majumdar.
And no wonder the fascination for Mao plays out.
Classic case, the irony is extraordinary in what I'm about to say. He set the precedent for the first abuse of Article 356 by dismissing a duly elected communist government which came to power in Kerala.
And
Actions speak louder than words.
And it's so much for the media to correct themselves on the liberal use of the word fascism and autocratism, which
All right.
started then.
Philip Spratt, an ex-communist, analyzes Nehru very beautifully, which will answer your question automatically.
Okay.
About Nehru being a Democrat and whether he didn't spot the dichotomy in, his love for USSR.
Philip Pratt.
Philip Spratt.
Spratt, okay.
He says that it is not for the want or the love of tyranny that Nehru did not declare himself as a communist leader modeled after Mao or Stalin, but it is for the kind of historical forces and the society that was unique only to India that prevented him from declaring himself as a dictator.
So stay with this.
He was afraid to go against this society, this cultural inheritance. That is only what precisely what prevented him from trying to convert India into a full-fledged communist country.
So stay with this for a minute, because this is something I kind of wanted to ask, and I sensed as you were narrating that in spite of the communist success in infiltrating education and subsequently other parts of the machinery, which you will talk about in detail in the next part, in spite of that, India never turned communist. So that means India or Bharat was their biggest failure.
Yes, just like
All credit to our ancestors.
Just like Bharatavarsha is Islam's greatest failure.
I mean, all credit to our ancestors.
So I think after the story after this, slowly we come at stage number 4. Stage number 3 ends with these competing streams of perspectives about how India's history should be written. The so-called nationalist stream, then the completely ideological communist motivated stream of alleged Marxist history writing, which became popular. So this roughly we can call this as stage 3, which occurred in the years immediately following India's independence. I think we can keep the story of the Marxist infiltration of the academia, most especially the absolute takeover, the thorough usurpation of the history establishment in the coming episode.
Perfect. I think this is intriguing and a compelling point at which we can conclude the second part. So, and I can see from the last or the first part of the series to what you narrated now, the vigor and the damage. You quoted liberally from facts that this will turn out to be an eye-opening series. So I'm looking forward to what lies ahead. So
thank you.
So
I'm also looking forward to the same, Parag. We'll meet in the next episode.
So with that, we conclude the second part of the mega series on how Marxists destroyed Indian Itihasa. As you would have seen in the narrative that unfolded when I was talking to Sandeep, there are so many stunning facets that have come out in how history evolved, the trajectory it took from the emergence of Habib and the Marxists, and how it played out till the independence and the little after independence period. So we shall continue part 3 of this mega series, and we take it from there on with Sandeep Balakrishna. And as fascinating and enlightening as I found it, I would like to believe that all of you who've been watching and listening would also find it. Like I said, it is an eye-opening series, a much called for exercise. And what I believe it will do is to serve as a ready reckoner of truth for posterity, for those who are actually seeking the truth, which is essentially all those who are interested in history, as Sandeep defined it. So, on that note, while we look forward to you joining us for part 3 of this mega series, we would request you to like, share, and subscribe to the channel Dharma Dispatch for this series and similar well researched content that Sandeep has invested his life in. And also, we would appreciate if you could give your super thanks to this part so that more and more people get to know about this. So, with that, we'll be back again. Thank you.